And we're live.
Hello and welcome to the Modern Romantic Podcast, where we celebrate and inspire romanticism through passionate people doing incredible things. Hi, I'm the son of a witch. Hi, I'm Trey. And I am joined by my co-host, who is, I don't know, beaming with either pleasure or stifling a laugh. Emily. Hi, Emily.
I'm a family today. And I don't know. I like that I like that you came up with something clever. I was thinking maybe I should be a daughter of the moon. Yeah, if we're gonna play on that. But yeah, welcome to the show.
Yeah.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, no. I think there's a particular reason of why I chose that string of words, and I think that's our guest today. To call me a fan would probably be an understatement, but Emily, would you do the pleasure of introducing our fantastic guest today?
I would. Today on our baking show. I'm just kidding. Today we have someone who is a creator of enchanting worlds and has inspired many. Welcome to the podcast, Gregory Maguire.
Thank you. I am so glad to be here. And I have to say, I've done a fair number of podcasts, and I've certainly done a fair number of interviews, but I have never seen introducers that crack themselves up before I start talking.
We're just silly all the time.
Which makes me feel like I came to the right party.
Oh, hooray!
Sometimes, 60 seconds into a podcast, you think, "Oh, I got off at the wrong floor. I really shouldn't be here, should I?" They know it, I know it, and now we're stuck. But I liked how you introduced yourself, so thank you so much for inviting me, and thank you for caring about the romantic impulse. Of course, romantic means a lot of different things depending on how you're going to structure it. But thank you for inviting me to the romantic impulse in the way that you consider literature, and probably the way that you consider a healthy way to live your life. So, given that, my gratitude for being invited, perhaps I did get off the wrong floor, and this is the romance of dental hygiene or something, and so I've got it completely inappropriately. Here I am eating cookies, and my teeth are going to hell, and you have to tell me what it is that I'm doing wrong. But anyway.
We're here for it.
100%.
Just keep living. Right. I like how you put that, that it's a way to live, because I feel like it is for us anyway.
Yeah.
We embrace that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, I'll get like daily messages or notifications from Emily, who's taking part of a every day doing something creative in July. And so it doesn't matter what it is, just every day do something creative for yourself.
Well, Emily, what have you done so far this month?
Yeah, I found that it's harder than I thought it would be.
Really? And does it have to be something new creative? Or something you like to do creative and you just do it because you like it?
Well, it's there are no rules. It started with Brooke Shaden, who's a fine art photographer, and we had her on the show a little over a year ago. It's probably been longer than that now. Anyway, and she's doing this July creative challenge, and I thought, well, we can do this. I can do this. I'm creative. And so, but there are no rules. If you skip a day, you skip a day. If you doesn't have to be the same thing. It doesn't have to be new. As long as you're creative in some way. Being creative can be how you put your food on your plate. It can be however you broke your cookie into the shape you wanted to eat next. It could be. I did so far photography and glass fusion have been my two creative things. Yeah.
Did that come over? That's great. Yeah. That was my creative input for the day.
So yeah, if anybody wants to join in, July Creative Challenge is the hashtag, and you can go check out what everybody's doing and just join in for even a couple days if that's all you can do.
It makes me think, Emily, that when various people have said to me, you Gregory, have an interesting mind, and there are so many things you might have done, and so many things it's really clear you could have done. I have friends who are doctors who say, you could have been a doctor. You can listen to the thing that I'm saying in 30 seconds and understand where I'm going, even though you didn't go to 4 years of med school. And I have my my husband is a former lawyer, and at dinner he always says, "Oh, you should have been the one to go to law school." So I know I have some strings to my bow, and I'm happy about that. But the business of making things, the business of starting out in a day and saying, I have to make something today. That's really the fuel in my gas tank, if you will. The need to, whether it be, as you say, let's pivot the table by 45 degrees and eat dinner at an angle tonight,
Yeah.
which we did last night to everybody's annoyance except for mine.
Really? Oh, I love that you did that.
Yes, I just let's look at something from a different angle. Let's carry our plates next week out, and let's sit on the stone wall and eat in a row like crows on a telephone wire. And it's not just about eating, but I have definitely embraced that instinct to innovate as a way, which is partly a creative method, but as a way to keep knocking myself out of normalcy so that I can find something arresting that is worth knowing that I didn't know before. So I think a creative July is a really great idea. And I might join you on it, even though it's already July 8th or something.
Well, it sounds like you did already with dinner.
Yes, last night.
Last night. So you started. You still have part of today yet.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, that's wonderful. And how, Emily, would you say that living a creative July or a creative any day in your life is related to the concept of what you think of when you think of a romantic podcast or romantic stance? Is there something about innovation that leans into and influences and exerts an urgent pressure upon your concept of romance or romance?
Right. Wow, what a question.
I know. I like to set my interlocutors on their feet first.
This is great, especially for a baking show. I really didn't expect that.
You fling the baking powder over your left shoulder into the cookie dough. No, but I mean, it's kind of serious. I do mean it kind of seriously, because we haven't defined our terms yet. But a romantic podcast does stand for something. It stands for something that is not really in the Hallmark aisle. It stands for something else.
Yes, it does.
I haven't seen the rest of your podcasts, but I wouldn't have come on board if I had not really kind of believed, oh, you wouldn't be doing this unless you already knew this. But my question really is, what is the interrelationship between innovation and a romantic stance against a kind of mechanistic and soul-killing world? Is there a relationship? Maybe there isn't. Maybe I'm just blathering.
I think there is, because I see it as I want to create the world around me to feel how I want it to feel. So I will innovate to create that. If I want a climbing rose wall, I don't have one right now, but that's like a dream one day. Right. Because how cool would those pictures look with a climbing rose wall in mind? I just bought yesterday 3 gigantic hibiscus plants to put in the front. I was only going to do one, and then I went, there should be 3 here. Yeah. And so I went back and I got 2 more, and now I have 3, and I can see them from here, and wow, they make such a difference. So I want my world to be this romanticized version of life here. Yeah. So for me, it's innovating whatever that is in my mind. So where my garden is, where I put things, where sometimes it's the food that I make. Sometimes it's extra rich for that reason. And so it's little things. Like I said, it's about how you put food on your plate, because plating is an art form. Yeah. And surrounding myself with art. My life is kind of already surrounded in art. And so I believe art does that. And I really enjoy innovation in art.
Yeah. How about you, Trey? I'm looking this way because on my screen you're over there.
Yeah.
So you may be over there, but
For me, creating is actually taking a more active role in my life. Like
Mhm,
for a lot of my life, I've let other people speak for me, or
mhm.
I've taken the very passive, it doesn't matter. No, it matters.
Yeah.
And you are actively making a choice to be passive. So I
Mhm.
would rather be so much more active in the creating process to
Uh-huh.
get what I want out of that
Right.
versus just letting it happen and seeing where the cards lay.
Right. Can you give me an example of some time in the last 2 or 3 weeks where you had a choice to be active or passive, and you can remember flipping the switch and say, "No, I'm going to actually stand up here," and I mean, it might even be, "Do we want pizza or Kentucky Fried Chicken, tonight?" Nobody knows, and then somebody says, Trey says, "No, we're not having pizza again for the ninth night in a row. We're gonna go get Chinese or something." But
Trey's like, no, Seth, no more pizza.
Believe it or not, it was actually a conversation about dinner.
Oh, was
There,
it?
I'm not even kidding.
this is a cooking show.
It is.
Food is very important. Let's just get that clear.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, we were talking about where we wanted to go and eat, and for the first time in a while, I'm normally the person who will say like, "It doesn't really matter. I don't
Yeah,
care."
yeah,
No, I wanted Chinese food. I was like, "We're getting Chinese food."
yeah, 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 yeah. Good, good. I like that. I think that's a kind of inoculation for anybody who might be listening, to remind all of us that it's okay to stop and to listen to the pattern of blood that's flowing in your veins, and see whether you can decipher in that particular kind of staccato, that kind of Morse code of your own system, what it is that you actually need or want. And I actually think that is part of being romantic. Um, I think I think being involved in a romantic uh, stance, that's the word I used before, and I think I'll stick with it,
Okay.
uh, means to take your own needs seriously,
Mhm.
not necessarily to the detriment of anybody else's, but not to sublimate them so that everybody else is happy and gets what they need, and you're the only one who doesn't. This is something I'm actually quite good at. So,
Oh.
but I'm, trying very hard to, even now at this point in my life, to continue to say, no, what you need and feel is as valid, Gregory, as anybody else. And it's okay to say, I want Chinese. I've had enough pizza. And did you see what was at the bottom of that box of Kentucky Fried Chicken last time we got it? Never mind. We won't talk about
Well, thinking about some of the writing that you've done, um, when I think back to some of your works where you have based many of them on either well-known works or works of fiction that are very well ingrained in some people's minds, you still take that fresh perspective in order to give them agency and in order to give them a level of authenticity that I sometimes see other authors kind of lean into the cliche. So my
it.
question for you is, how do you, when you're crafting these characters, maintain that sense of a fresh perspective while you balance those existing narrative elements that people are familiar with?
That's a really great question, and like all really great questions, I'll get back to you in 3 months on on the answer. I mean, a really great question can't be answered glibly, even though I have uh, Irish in my background, so I can speak to almost anything. The truth is, Trey, the honest truth is, I'm not really sure how I do that, but I do know that another aspect of what I think of as the romantic stance is authenticity. And so to be to be romantic, again, I haven't asked you to define the term, and maybe I should stop talking and let you do that. But to be romantic is not to make a caricature of the hardness of life. It's really to try to crack the veneer of life and say, where is its native pulse? Where is its authentic pulse? That finding the authentic pulse of life, of a character in a story, actually means being as honest as you can, which means not lazing about the Hallmark aisle and saying, well, this person's like this person's like that. Let's get out of here and pay, and get on the road. Being authentic is an important part of embracing the pulse of life. And all characters, even if they're very, very minor ones in a story, have a legitimate claim, I believe, to being honored with a certain kind of authenticity. Do you remember, I think it must have been E.M. Forster in Aspects of a Novel, when he famously talked about there are several kinds of characters in fiction. There are, and I forget the term he used, but there are full characters and there are flat characters. And the flat characters, he said, and again, I don't think those were exactly the right terms, but he said flat characters are understood and recognized by 2 or 3 tropes or little gestures or turns of phrase that they say every time they come into a room. Oh, that's what Rue McClanahan is going to say on Golden Girls. That's, she's not exactly a flat character, but she's going to be a certain way. And she only actually escapes her flatness when she defies the expectation, when she gets down to the nub and she reveals something authentic that runs counter to the stereotype, the parody, the textbook, this is the Bible for Golden Girls kind of profile of who she is. I think, Trey, to finally come to an answer to your question, I think because I so love human character, I try to find something that is surprising and even unnerving in every character, even one who's only in a book for a paragraph. I try to find something that makes them a little bit other than I thought they might be when I did interviewing in the casting hall and say, you come with me. I want them to come with me and then be a little bit different than who I thought I was hiring. That to me gives life and vivacity to stories, even stories I'm writing, even stories based on characters that we all know or think that we know. It's peeling back the skin, pretty Hannibal Lecterish kind of image. Never mind about that, but just trying really to get the pulse, trying to really get the pulse of somebody who is always more complicated than you're going to have time to find out. But you want to signal that, you want to flash it like a 1950s maiden in a train who's being abducted, and she flashes with her compact. You just want to flash a little image of something so that somebody out there knows, oh, we're not going to hear anything more about this person. They're going to get off at the next stop, but they are a full person. They're not just performing the function of revealing the identity of the escaping, adulteress. So anyway, that's what I think. I care about the particularity of every character in a book, and not just the function that they can serve me in my larger, maybe paradigmatic hope to say something about an intellectual subject. People are more than elements in an equation. And that, I think, is a romantic slant, to allow someone their full humanity and not to be exactly what you need, but to be themselves and therefore be more than you bargained for.
And I think, sorry, Trey.
Nope. Go ahead.
I was going to say that authenticity is refreshing. It's something I think we all truly want and desire to be our authentic selves. So seeing it in characters, seeing it in our lives in whether it be entertainment or reading, whatever, is refreshing and inspiring.
Yeah. When I was in my teens and early 20s, the characteristic in anybody yeah, I wasn't thinking about the elders like the Shakespeares or the Dickens or Emily Dickinson's. But even Emily Dickinson, I think, the characteristic that I valued most in people and that I followed, that made me want to follow them, was something that, for lack of a better word, I called energy. That there were some, I mean, the Smoky Chanteuses who would, no regrets. There's no energy there left anymore. They've already gone through the point where they have no regrets anymore. You should have a few regrets, goddammit. And but the younger singers and ones who sang, like, if they didn't get this song out of their lungs in the next 2.5 minutes, then they were going to die. And poets can do that, and novelists can do that too. And that was who I cherished. Now, because you get older and you realize there are many, many, many ways to read urgency and energy. And in fact, at this stage of my life, no regrets. That actually feels quite energetic to me.
I think having that different perspective, or being able to have the capacity to explore that, is really fun. What I think about right now is because I'm going back through the audio versions of the Wicked series, and right now I am through to call Wind Upon Water. I'm sorry, to call Winter Upon Water.
Oh, right, yes.
And it had just reached the part where Lady Glinda was kicking one of the guards out of the second story window, and it felt so antithesis to her character. But I realized, no, she recognizes that something needs to change, and she's recognizing a greater purpose here. So
Yes.
it's that moment of growth for her, where she's recognizing this is beyond her capabilities, and she's becoming the person that she needs to be versus the person that she thought she would become.
Yes. It's that wonderful business of claiming your own agency, especially when you've been locked, as she has been, in locked in the original book, locked in Broadway, locked in my own books. She's a beautiful, rich, ditzy person, and she still has to surprise us if we're going to care about her. And she has to surprise herself too. And so I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Trey. I really am, because when I saw, about halfway through that section, I knew that she was going. I always knew she was a much more moral person than she cared to let on. But when I saw that she was actually going to become a kind, she's kind of under house arrest, and yet she becomes an activist in defense of the child who is there with her, and of her house staff, some of whom have been abused. My heart swelled with pride that I got to go to the same party with her. And I got to carry her train and watch her push that guy out the window onto the roof of the dancing ballroom, whatever it was that she did. I loved that scene. So for you to name that and claim it and recognize it for what it was, really, just, I'll tell you, this is the best thing happened to me today.
Oh.
Very, very nice.
Oh, yes. I had a question. Let me go back to my notes really quick. Emily.
No, right. Yep. No.
Oh my gosh. Kind of thinking through, like, interpretation.
Mm-hmm.
One, I am super excited for you, because you not only do you have the Broadway version of Wicked, you also have the movie version coming out in November.
Right.
But I would also like to mention that you had a movie adaptation of the Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister.
Yes.
Which I actually really liked it. I know it was different from the book, but I still liked what they did. Whenever you hear that something is getting adapted from one of your works, do you ever think, oh, I really hope that they keep this, or alternatively, I really hope they change this?
Those are, again, two really good questions. I have a benefit over many people whose works get signed up, pardon me, for some kind of adaptation. I've just come from dinner, so I'm processing. And the I have an advantage over many people in that my sense of ownership of my own work, especially for those pieces that you've mentioned, is fairly thin. I have built my imaginative work largely on the backs and shoulders of people whose work has come before mine. And so, therefore, I have already been playing around with found materials. When it comes to Stockard Channing playing the stepmother in the Cinderella story, as she does in Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister, I always said it should say the TV tag and TV, what used to be TV Guide, should say starring Stockard Channing and her eyelashes. She, her eyelashes were definitely not 17th century. She could have swept the streets of Harlem with those eyelashes.
They get their own billing.
But but when somebody takes something of mine that has already been, built on the architecture of somebody else's work, whether it be in the public domain or whether as an L. Frank Baum original material, I basically, as long as I have approved it and I've said, yes, you may go ahead, I like giving them carte blanche, because why should I be the last development in the life story of a story that's going to live long beyond my work and long beyond the work of anybody who wants to adapt it. Now, there are some things I did. I've done a fair number of novels for children and young adults and for adults that don't have any particular relationship to pre-existing material, or not very much of one. One that comes to mind is a novel called The Next Queen of Heaven, which was a novel, had no fantasy in it, and it was a novel set in 1999 about a gay man, choir director, and a kind of teenage slut, if you will, girl who makes trouble for everybody into whose life she walks. And their kind of unholy alliance, if you will. And, if that's based on anything, it's based on the story of, the pregnant Virgin Mary and the non-functional Joseph, being ready to bring Jesus into the world. That's why it's called The Next Queen of Heaven. I figured if Jesus was born of a virgin first time around and it didn't work out all that well, maybe next time around he'd be born to the teenage slut who slept with the football team. Let's try something new 2,000 years later and see what happens. But it didn't rely heavily on the original text of the Bible. And so if that book was, interestingly, not signed up, was not optioned for a film by Universal. If it had been, I suspect I might have felt a little bit more possessive about what they would do with it, because it came more whole cloth from me and also from my life, but Elphaba existed before I named her. I know that she did. She existed in my psyche. She existed on the 1939 film stock. She existed in the 1900 novel, and she probably existed in all the people that gave L. Frank Baum the idea of putting her and other characters like her into his novels. So I'm just another Cub Scout helping the green-skinned old lady down the street and handing her off to another Cub Scout who will help her, go another 20 years or another 50 years or another 100 years. I'm not actually very influential, I think, in her long life. I just happen to be the Cub Scout at this particular corner.
You're like a steward.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So I don't take it all that seriously, but I will admit this. When the idea of Wicked not being made into a big budget Hollywood film starring Demi Moore but in fact being a Broadway musical instead. The producer of the musical and the eventual producer of the film that's about to be released said to the composer, Stephen Schwartz, whose idea had been to turn it into a musical, you're going to have to talk to Gregory because he's the one who has the rights and he's the one who will know what to do. Stephen Schwartz came to me and we met in an undisclosed location in central Connecticut. It was like it was
well
like
said.
it was like something out of Graham Greene. It was raining. We had our collars up to here. We were walking through the woods where we couldn't be mic'd, and he was saying, I know you want this to be a movie. I know what Universal has said they will pay you for it if they finish buying, the option out. And I know you have 3 children. And I know that you're concerned about paying off your mortgage, so you never have to sell your house because you can't feed them. All that is important, he said. But I also know in my deep heart that the musical version of your story will hit in a different way because, and he gave me some good examples. He said, your story is filled with 19th century romantic, back to there, impulses of the big heart. That I think is maybe our working definition for tonight for what is a romantic podcast, the podcast about the big heart. Most of us try to pretend it doesn't exist, but we know it does. The big heart. Stephen Schwartz knows it does too. And he said, a musical brings the big heart front and center and doesn't pretend it doesn't exist. We all know it does. We pretend it doesn't because we're post-irony, we're post-Vietnam, we're cynical, and we're all the things we're supposed to be in this corrupt and decaying world. But the big heart still exists. And in a piece of musical theater, the character can walk forward and can stand and sing what is in his or her heart and speak to every single person in the room. He got me with that. But of course, I had a big heart for my own children, so I had to protect their interests too. And I said, yeah, that sounds very good. I mean, I'm a gay man, so instead I was thinking Broadway, what's not to love? But I still, I had to protect my intellectual property. I had to protect my obligations to feed my children. So then he went on, and he got a little nervous because I do have a Scottish Presbyterian demeanor that I come by honestly. And he said, I'm so convinced, Gregory, that you're going to understand the rightness of my concept, even though you won't make the big bucks that you might have made for a movie, that I will tell you, I have already conceived of the opening number. And I said, oh, have you really? Well, Stephen. And he said, he didn't quite have the bubble, but he said it was going to open right after the witch has been splashed by Dorothy, and the Munchkinlanders or whoever was there are going to be singing, she's dead, she's dead, she's dead, like Ding Dong, the witch is dead. And the song is going to be called No One Mourns the Wicked. And in those 5 words, he sealed the deal. With No One Mourns the Wicked, I said to myself, okay, this is it. He's got it. He knows that I did not write Wicked in order to be a Saturday Night Live parody, in order to take the bones of something that was treasured and trash them. I wanted to take the bones of something that was treasured and, as Keats said, wreath them in garlands on the way to the sacrifice. I wanted to expose them and glorify them. And with No One Mourns the Wicked, he basically said to me, I know why you wrote this story. I get it. And I got that he got it. And even though my lawyer didn't tell him for about another 14 months till we'd hammered out the terms, nonetheless, I basically made the decision on the basis of of the fact that he named his first song, No One Mourns the Wicked. I thought, okay, he knows why. He knows what this is about. That's all I care about. He knows it's about the big heart. He knows it's about the big heart. And it is. And so therefore, whatever he wanted to do with it, You'll change the characters, you'll change the plot, you'll change the ending. If it remains about the big heart, the moral heart and the passionate heart, then you have my blessing, because that's where I wrote from.
I love that. Do you find that keeping that principle in mind, or do you find that throughout time, throughout the social climate that we've been in the last 20 some years that this has been on Broadway and beyond, do you feel that it's accepted differently now than it was then?
You mean the play and the big heart of the play?
Yeah, the book, all of it.
Yeah. What is really scary, Emily, is that I wrote the book 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And I wrote it was published 30 years ago next year, but I wrote it 30 years ago this year and a little bit into last year. And at the time that I wrote it, most of what I thought I was doing was relying on tropes that people would recognize from oppressive social and political situations of the past. Maybe not the very far past, but of the past. And what has happened, to my regret in some ways, is that the story of Wicked, especially as said in the play, but also in the novel, just seems to become more and more pertinent. That's terrible. I thought it was maybe too retro when I published it in 1995. I heard I did a show about a week ago with Winnie Holtzman, who is the script writer, the book writer, as they call it, for the play. Mm-hmm. She introduced me. It was a political show. We were trying to raise money for a certain political exercise. I forget what it was. And in introducing me, she said, the author of this prophetic book. And while I was, on the one hand, I have an ego. I'm a human being. I come pre-packed with an ego, whether I admire it or not. There it is. My ego was fluffing itself up and, putting on airs. But the other part of me, the other side of me, was chagrined to think, was this book really prophetic? It does. The messages it seems to have seem ever more pointed after 30 years. And the play seems ever more pointed. And I don't know whether either of you have seen the 3.5-minute trailer that Universal has released for the musical film.
Yes.
I've seen it. I think it's had something like 230 million views in the first month, of which about 18 million are mine.
It just keeps it on loop.
Yeah. But when I watch it and I see the genius casting of Ariana Grande and Cynthia Erivo, and I think they keep finding ways to make it more heart-wrenching and more pertinent, and it gets more and more pertinent with every day. Partly, I'm glad that it's there to serve the world. We'd rather our work serve than be forgotten and not serve.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, I wouldn't mind if it had become dusty, because we've become so much better, so much kinder, so much more just, so much more thoughtful, so much more willing to sacrifice. We haven't done that. So this story, sadly, continues to have a lot of meaning.
I agree, but one thing that I truly love in this interpretation of, or adaptation of, not only the musical, but they're also pulling more from the book itself to kind of really expound on the first act of the musical itself. And speaking of the trailer, you've talked about this in other interviews, but that flashback sequence to Elphaba as a child.
Oh my gosh, yeah.
Especially in the last 30 seconds of that, was so poignant to have such a stark difference between a child standing and looking in front of, I don't know, maybe 10 or more kids,
right,
just glaring her down, it makes that perspective so much more visceral and so much more like I am in there with her.
Absolutely.
And,
Absolutely. Sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
no, I'm going to keep rambling at this point. So, but to have that sort of moment and to know that it's incorporating more of the book is creating somewhere between a full adaptation without music and an adaptation with music, and
Yes.
bringing that together to become its own thing.
That's what I hope it will happen. I certainly think it's interesting that I think they've released three distinct kinds of preview glimpses, and I've noticed that as they go 1, 2, 3, that they're introducing more music as they go along. In the 3.5-minute trailer, you actually hear clips of several songs like Defying Gravity and Popular, which are the two of the big songs from the play. The first sequence that dropped during the Super Bowl didn't have any, I mean, it had background music, but it had no singing. So you would never know that it was a musical if you didn't actually know it was a musical. And I find that if you look at the 3.5-minute sequence, where, as you say, Trey, there's that brief glimpse of Elphaba as a child being shunned and shunted and looked at with scorn and derision, it does seem to suggest that the movie is going to be able to sink its scupper much deeper into the reality of what it means to be marginalized. And what it means to be marginalized means a whole life of not being taken as yourself. We all make mistakes, and any one of us cannot be invited to the next party because we said something stupid and we annoyed the host or something. But to live a whole life on the margin, or even beyond the margin, I think that one little clip, which does refer to a few things that happened in the original novel, deepens the entire trajectory of the story. It's like, what is it? It's like 3 seconds where you see the young Elphaba and you see those kids glaring at her like that, and it deepens her whole life story to realize she is standing here at this point in her life, having had to live through all of this, and that's something the play isn't able to give you. And if the movie can give it to you just in a tiny little flashback like that, you're going to come away finding, I believe, that the story is even more powerful on the screen than maybe it has been on the stage, which is pretty damn powerful to me anyway. So I'm delighted about that. But that does bring me to the subject of my next book, which you probably have heard about. In about 8.5 months, my book being brought out by Harper is called Elfie. It is the story of young Elphaba, and it's kind of squeezed in between the end of part 1 of Wicked, when she's saying her first word. She says horrors at the side of the dried up lake, and then you turn the page and she's on her way to college, or she's at college. It takes the 14 years between the time that she's 2 or 2.5 and the time that she goes to college, and it unpacks what happened to her, exactly what that scene is doing with the girl, and it relies on 2 or 3 very short scenes, none more than a page long, that were in the original novel. In the original novel, I thought it was important that we not just jump from babyhood to college. None of us jump from babyhood to college. What happens to us between babyhood and college is what makes us the mess that we are for the rest of our lives. And I had to take those parts out just because the book was too long and there were lots of other things I couldn't take out and wouldn't. So I was persuaded, just jump from when she's 2 to when she's 16 or 17 and showing up at college. But I always felt that that was shortchanging the reader and shortchanging the person who wanted to explore, how does this particular individual become the individual we think we're reading about, and will she actually be the person by the time we get to the end of the novel that we thought we were going to be reading about when we picked up the novel at the library or the bookstore. And so it's I just can't wait for people to read it and for people to say, you know what, you pulled out of that driveway a long time ago. You should have left. You should have left those pages where the arch floor. But to me, it's very important because it does it. You know, the child is father to the man, as Wordsworth taught us to say, and so the young Elphaba is mother to the Elphaba who has to become a freedom fighter. And that little scene that you referenced in the trailer suggests exactly that. And it just, I had tears stand in my eyes when I saw it the first time. I was so pleased that the director or the script writer thought, now we have time, we can do this. We have the way, the means, and the intention to do it. We're going to do it.
While I see the desire to include those years, those very formative years, I think back to something that my high school English teacher said, which was, what an author says is just as important as what they don't say. And it leaves a little bit of mystery for the audience to kind of think about and consider. Now, let me dispel any fears that I am so happy to get to find out what actually did happen between those years. But there's also something kind of fun about the mystery of letting you kind of wonder what actually did happen. And you don't really get that and don't get that satisfaction. So you're almost compelled to keep reading to maybe put pieces of that back and for the reader themselves.
That's a really legitimate position to take, and I endorse it. And in my defense, I will simply say that my instinct in putting character on the page is never to come to conclusions. It's just to continue to enrich the mystery. So, I mean, if we didn't really know why Elphaba was exactly like what she was when she was 17 and showed up at Shiz, we also don't really know, after reading about it for 212 pages, why she was like she was when she was in as a child. We just know that she was. And sometimes knowing that somebody is there is the real act of generosity of spirit, not knowing why they are the way they are, but that they are. I think it's Wittgenstein who said, not how the world is the miraculous, but that it is. And that's my take on character too. Not how Elphaba got to the child, but that she did, that she's there. And I would hope, Trey, because I really do take your point very seriously. I would hope that you could happily read and will happily read Elfie in March of 2025 and still say she remains a mystery, like every other human being I've ever met in my life. That's the intention. Whether I succeed or not, you can send me an email, and then I'll unfriend you, and then
and then you can send them cookies.
yeah, a poison cookie, my dear.
I will happily read it, and I think going back to something you said earlier, you may be given a lot about the character, but if we want to be the person sitting on the train for 5 minutes that gives you a flash of something,
yeah,
you're still not going to get everything. You're not going to get every second of every hour of a person's life. You're still
Absolutely.
only going to get those minutes.
Yeah.
So absolutely think that we're still going to get that mystery, and I still look forward to reading it when it comes out.
It's all right, but I really do think you do raise a really important point. People said to me, kids actually, because after a while, even though Wicked was published for adults, when the play came up and then suddenly it was being read in high schools and even middle schools, something I did not intend. There were certain scenes I would not have put in it if I'd realized middle school would be reading it. I remember one boy said, well, now you've written the 4 books of the Wicked Years, what's going to come next? And I said, well, there's really nothing left. The Wicked Years are about the Wicked Witch of the West and the experiences of her progeny. That's our life penumbra, generally speaking, is 5 generations. If we come from the Kennedys or something, or the royal family, we might go back 6 or 7 or 15 generations. But most of us go back, we started our grandparents, our parents, and us. And then if we're lucky enough, we have children, and maybe they have children. And that's about as far as we get. We get 5 generations. And by the end of the Wicked Years, I've shown you a little bit of the grandparents, not as much as I had done in the original novel, but a little, that they come in a little bit more in Elfie, and the parents, and Elphaba, and her son, and her granddaughter. And that's the Wicked Years. Whatever happens to her granddaughter, if her granddaughter has children, the granddaughter's not going to have any idea who Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West, was. It's not going to be part of the Wicked Years. It's going to be something else. I said, so I'm done with the Wicked Years. And this kid was not satisfied. He said, he sat down a little bit, and he raised his hand again. I said, yes, Trey. What do you want now? and this kid said, I know. Why don't you write a new series called The Happy Years?
The Happy Years.
Happy Years. The Happy Years, where everybody can be like less stressed. And I laughed, and I said, what a good idea. But then eventually what happened is COVID happened.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And while at the end of the 4th book in the Wicked Years, called Out of Oz, I have the witch's green-skinned granddaughter flying out of Oz across an ocean that has basically not really ever been acknowledged or discovered by most of the people in the island hidebound inbred nation of Oz, very secluded and full of itself. There she goes, and she's leaving Oz, and she's devastated, she's broken, but she's also free. And that's where I left her. That's where I wanted to leave her. I had no idea what was going to happen to her, but I knew that what she was doing was the only thing she could do in order to stay alive. And so there she was. So that was fine. And that was, 10 years ago? And then COVID happened. And in the years in between the time that I published Out of Oz and the beginning of COVID, my own youngest child, who was a daughter, grew up and started going to college. And suddenly my concerns for her being in a tumultuous time where college was being turned over on its head, and none of us knew, especially in the first year of COVID, whether half the population of the planet was going to die, like in the plague. It's hard for us to remember how little we knew and how stressed we all were and how we retrenched in order to take, like, if an asteroid is going to come, what do you do? Well, get grandma's silver spoons. They must come into the bunker with us. I've suddenly felt a parental need to look in on Rain and see what had happened to her. I had not felt it 6 years earlier. I had felt it was actually more seemly and less kind of stalkery to not follow her. But after 6 years, as I'm watching my daughter try to navigate having to be sent home from college and come and take Zoom courses from underneath her Kermit blankie in her old childhood bedroom. I thought, this is a struggle. The struggle doesn't stop. I don't have to solve her problems for her, but I have to follow her on Instagram. I have to see what was happening to this child, this Rain, out over the ocean. And that is what prompted not the happy years, but a story simply called Another Day, which is really a novel in three parts, published in 3 successive years. And it only unlike The Wicked Years, which takes about 80 years to run, Another Day takes, I think, under a year, or maybe a year and a half total, to go from the beginning of the first volume to the end of the 3rd volume. It's a different kind of story. And I still leave Rain as an agent of her own mysterious life. But at least I know she made it through the initial turmoil, the initial turbulence in which I had abandoned her, 10 years earlier.
I love that, because we were talking about this on the last podcast, where we may come to a situation and think we're not able to find inspiration from this moment, but we revisit the subject later on and we find that there's so much more content within that. Whether that be a poem or a new work that you may not have discovered, you find a lot more inspiration from that. So I love that you were able to go back to something that you thought you had closed a chapter on, but still found a way to make it new.
Yeah. Well, we all, the thing is, this is what we have to do with ourselves too. I mean, you two are young and I'm older, but I'm still looking at myself, in the spirit of July innovation. I'm still saying, what do I feel like making today? Who do I feel like being today? I'm not done trying to find the authenticity of the changed self, the self that changes from day to day and from month to month and from year to year as we age. I'm not done with looking at that. Maybe if I, go into a memory care unit, I'll be done. But I'm not there. I don't think I'm there yet. Where are we? Yeah. Nurse, bring me my cookie. Bring me my water. Anyway.
Turn the table 45 degrees.
Exactly. Let me look out the window. Oh, that's not a window. That's the closet door. Well, I'll look at that. Anyway, it's it is. It, as one, I apologize for continuing to refer to the difference in our ages, but it is as I just came to one of those big bellied years with a big O at the end of it. And you do take a new kind of stock and you think, what kind of person am I now that I didn't used to be? And I'm not done asking that question. Now that may be a sign of huge and crippling ego, that who I am is so important that I have to keep asking the question. On the other hand, it may be a strategy for continuing to live as earnestly and as authentically and with as large a heart as having a romantic slant demands, as could possibly be. Asking yourself who you are when you step out to get the newspaper and you sniff something on the wind, and maybe it's the salt from Boston Harbor, or maybe it's despair from the recent debate. Maybe it's this, maybe it's that. You just have to ask yourself the question. If you stop asking the question, you stop paying attention to your capacities. And we're alive because we have capacities and we can still use them.
And that's what that innovation really is.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a lovely concept. I'm going to embrace it for the rest of this month.
Excellent.
Yeah.
One, please, somebody go back and clip that. I think that was an excellent quote. And I did not capture that. Gregory, we did have just a few more questions left to ask you.
Okay, sure.
One of which I want to give a shout out to a new listener to our podcast.
Okay.
Thank you, Rachel Yadanza, for submitting this question. Whenever you are crafting your characters, which new character that you created is your favorite, and why is it Fiyero?
Oh, gosh. Oh, well, Fiyero is pretty cool, I have to say. But I think of my new characters, really the one that I respond to the most is Lear, who is the son of the witch.
Mhm.
And the reason for that is that, unlike his famous mother, uh, Lear is uncertain of his capacities. I mean, his famous mother isn't all that certain either. She's actually a ragbag of a therapist's wet dream of all the things that she can't do for herself. But Lear doesn't even he's not even sure of his parentage, and he's not sure what he inherited from his father or from his mother, or until the end of Son of a Witch, he's not even sure she is his mother. He's not sure that he has any of her fire, any of that kind of zeal of energy that I was talking about being something that really motivated me in liking people. And he's a little more passive. He's a little regressive. He's a little uncertain. And I'd say that while Elphaba is my hero, uh, Lear is more a portrait of me. I am not the brave freedom fighter. I try to be, but I'm more like Lear. I second guess myself all the time, and I'm uncertain, and I'm just trying to do the right thing and maybe stay out of the limelight, if I possibly can. And so I have a soft spot in my heart for Lear, but he doesn't do very much except for react. But I think that's what most of us are like. We mostly react to what happens to us in life. We don't set the standards for other people's behavior. Now, maybe that's not true. Maybe in being a writer or being an artist of one sort or another, you do set standards for behavior for other people and maybe for yourself. But if I ask myself, oh, I'm like, oh gosh, I'm in this social, moral dilemma, political dilemma. What would Elphaba do? And then I think, what would Elphaba would do? And then I think, that's kind of a little creepy. That's a little onanistic because I mean, Elphaba is basically me. So why am I not able to feel myself what she would do? But I'm more like Lear. I'm more standing back, and because he's a little bit more broken, a little bit more tentative, he seems very human to me. And so, in a way, he's the one that I care about in some ways the most. I think men are weaker than women, basically, mostly, and uh, and weakness deserves protection too. So,
Yeah.
so I care about him. I don't know if that answers the question of the person who posed it. I forget her name. The new person, Rachel. Was it Rachel?
Yes.
It was.
Yeah. Sorry, Rachel. I hope I answered it the way that gave you some comfort, or at least some inkling into thinking about your own weakness and the weakness of people who live in your life, and how much they deserve to be honored and noticed and protected.
I think that absolutely does. I will probably respond to that, making sure that she listens to this episode.
Okay, good.
The other question I had for you is, you're not only a professional writer, but you're also an educator. You're also an advocate for excellence in literature for the young. What are some ways that we can help advocate for improved literacy?
Oh boy, that's a great question too, Trey. You do come up with them, don't you? You stay up all night long the night before thinking of these great questions. Uh, um, it is an uphill battle right now. I'm not going to pretend that I don't see our cultures at a trim. Are we still there?
Yes.
Can you hear
Yeah,
me?
there was a hiccup in the video feed,
Yeah.
but we can hear you.
There was. I'm not going to pretend that I don't think we're at a real sea change, uh, sort of moment in the tidal pushes of what makes our culture work. I believe that taking the time that children need to take in order to lose themselves for a little bit in a book is it's not just therapeutic for the child who for a very brief moment gets a reprieve from their own ego needs. They get not to think about themselves for a little bit as they think about Peter Rabbit or, Max and the Wild Things or, Mary Poppins, or I'm talking about very old books, but the concept is the same, even with the modern things that are published this year. I'm afraid that partly because of the outrageous climate of umbrage in the culture at large, the fighting against books, the taking books out of libraries, the fighting against each other, the children on the playground looking at Elphaba and scowling at her, because we've become so much less patient, so much less tolerant, that the time needed to park your ego to one side and live in the skin of a character in a book, that time is eroding. There's less and less of it afforded to children, and there's less and less culturally supported appreciation for the kind of character building and personality building that reading does when you're young. Mm-hmm. It used to be said that, now I should never talk about statistics because I can never remember them exactly. But I'll just make something up and then
yeah.
It was something like 75%, and I'm talking now of something I read about 35 years ago. 75% of Americans get 90% of their reading of literature, meaning fiction, poetry, before they get out of high school. Oh, yeah. So most of us, when we get out of high school, we are done. We have basically had our literature education. There is nothing ahead on the landscape for us unless we're among the rare people who actually cottoned on to reading and found it rewarding, found it a defense against the parts of the world that were threatening, found it whatever. We had literary sensibilities. We liked language. We couldn't afford an Apple phone, whatever. I think that when I was a kid, it was, I grew up in a culture and at a time when to read, 5 books a week was really not all that unusual in my environment, my family, and among the neighborhood of kids that I grew up with. But the culture itself has devalued that experience. And children are no fools. Reading is hard. Reading is hard work. And if they can find a way to be amused without having to put in the effort, they will take the easy way out, like most people who work in, executive offices, all over the world. They'll take the easy way out and earn the money and bank it and go home for an early lunch. And I worry about literacy, and I worry about the downstream effects of the corruption of sensibility, the corruption of what do I want to call it? A flexible sensibility, let's say, that can teach people to tolerate ambiguity and to tolerate not knowing the answer for a while, and to sustain inaccuracy. I'm not thinking of the right word. There's a word that's like tolerance, but it's not quite that. But subtlety, and a mind that can entertain 2 thoughts at the same time and consider them rationally, emotionally, but without having to kick one out the door and beat it in the face. And I think that literature does encourage the suspension of instantaneous opinion making. In literature, you have to spend time with a character in order to figure out where they're going and who they are. And I think the more that literature erodes from the lives, not just of children, but also of adults, the more inclined we are to accept the easy, the bromides, the kickstand conclusions and continue to tribalize and to separate ourselves into the camps. We all know this is happening. This is happening all over the world, not just in the United States. But I think the erosion of literacy and of an appreciation of literacy for the young, which is happening in the United States, is a significant problem, and it's also a significant thing that the normal citizen can do to try to correct. I mean, anybody who lives in a neighborhood with a public school can walk in and say, I'll do my Corey test so you can see I'm not a child molester or anything. But I want to come in and read to the first graders. Can I come in once every 2 weeks for 20 minutes and read books of my own selection? And if you have any gift to be enthusiastic, you can begin yourself in your local school. You can begin to help stem the tide of that. I have to call it corruption, that sort of tarnish that settles upon the mind of the young when they think, I already know everything. I don't have to keep open. I don't have to keep vivid. I don't have to keep thinking. I already know what I think. God damn it, get out of my way. Excuse my language.
No, I think what a brilliant way to contribute. And I think that would bring joy to the person going into the school and reading as well. Yeah. What a cool connection to make with kids. And
there's something everybody can do. I mean, you don't have to be an advocate or have, a doctorate in children's literature or anything. You have to care about what you love and share it.
Yeah.
That's the most, the best thing. Do you both of you, Emily, Trey, do you go to dinner parties? And if you go to dinner parties, even if it's, Chinese and not Kentucky Fried Chicken this time, do you sit across the table from people and do you say, well, what are you reading now? What are you reading? And it's the enthusiasm of somebody else at the table said, oh, you got to put down everything else that you're reading because you have to read Patrick Bringley's All the Beauty in the World. That's what you have to read. That is wonderful. And I'll tell you in one sentence why, and go get it. And I'm now telling you, and everybody listening to this, Patrick Bringley, All the Beauty in the World. That's what I'm saying. I'm enthusiastic about it. I cried at the end. It is a tremendous, tremendous book about aesthetics, beauty, and loss and survival. And it's a nonfiction piece. And so I'm enthusiastic about it. So I want you to read it. And that's gonna move you more than the latest review you read, in the New York Times book review. You want somebody you trust and somebody you think has a sensibility that you maybe on some marginal way that you appreciate. Well, okay, he was pretty much of a jerk, but he did sound excited about that book. So, so I'm going to go see if I can find it.
Yeah, I think you're right because I have blindly gone and bought books and read them that were suggested by a friend because you're right. I trusted them. They, talked enthusiastically about it. And of course, that's all I need.
And all the more so when you're with kids. I mean, because I spent many, many, many years before I was able to earn a living actually selling books. I spent a lot of time in classrooms with kids. And I could, because I have an open face, and I like to think I could bring a big heart into the classroom, I could get anybody to read anything because I could laugh about it and joke about it and talk about it in such a way that everybody wanted to do it. Kids are wonderful that way. They want to be stimulated. They want to be brought along, and they want to be let in on the secret. And you come through and say, oh, I got this tremendous thing. You're not going to believe this. And I'll read you one paragraph, and then you have to go find it for yourselves. And then there's it's like a scene out of Airport or something, people rushing through the doors.
Contagious,
to go to the library and get those books, get that book.
Well, that begs the question, Emily. What are you reading right now?
Oh, I'm in the middle of like 3 books. Yeah. Oddly enough, 2 of them are nonfiction.
What are you reading?
Oh, goodness. They're up on my nightstand. This is where I draw a complete
It's
blank.
okay if you don't remember the names, but like history or sociology or?
A lot of it's psychology, actually.
Oh,
I'm reading one about the mind
uh-huh.
and how I don't know how to word this better, so I'll just leave that alone. One is about is a psychology book about seeing light in like your dark side,
Uh-huh.
which I found fascinating. So of course I again recommended by a friend, so I just went
Right.
and got
Yeah.
it and decided.
Yeah.
And then the other one I found it at Goodwill, and it was just there was something about the title, and I opened it up and read like one page, and I went, okay, I'm
Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
cannot remember. I want to say the author is Virginia or Charlotte or I can't remember any of it. I'm sorry.
That's all right. Is either Virginia Woolf or her twin sister Charlotte Woolf?
It's by Charlotte Wolfe. Yeah, I feel bad that I don't
Yeah.
remember.
How about
Yeah,
you, Trey? What are you reading?
Not to be on the nose, but I am actually legitimately in
which one is
reading
that?
Out of
Oh
Oz.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
So I'm in Out of Oz, but I am also about halfway through The Picture of Dorian Gray.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah.
How are you finding that?
I'm not gonna lie, I love Oscar Wilde.
Uh-huh.
Um, I have just gotten to it's right before they make the Faustian deal or the
Uh-huh.
like implied Faustian deal. I'm right to that part. I think it is so intriguing to listen to him talk about the moral dilemma of people, or even what a touch of malice can do to a person's thought, or putting doubt into someone else,
Yeah.
and watching the wrath that incurs within that person.
Uh-huh.
Um, at least that's what I'm taking away from it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh,
I haven't read that in years. Now you make me want to go back and read it. So
oh,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
well, to our listening audience, I know that we've spent some time talking about Wicked, the Wicked series, and then the series that follows Wicked with Rain within about a year
Mhm.
after the Wicked series ends. But I also want to call attention to your other works, because you have written numerous amounts of other fiction works that I do want to call out. Some of those have included things like Mirror Mirror. We've alluded to Confessions of an Ugly Stepsister. Some of the other titles I do not have listed, but your catalog of books is quite numerous, and I want to make sure that our listening audience not only pays attention to the Wicked series, but your other works as well.
And I will say that for those of you who may be interested, if you look at my website, which is www.gregorymaguire.com, there's a pretty good kind of screenshot of the books that I think are the ones you should go to first. If I have 45 books, the top 7 or 8 are at the top of the screen. So those are the ones that I would recommend the most highly
Oh,
myself.
good. That's good to know.
Yeah.
Good takeaway. I'm going to go take a look at which ones you recommend. Gregory, I was a fan before this podcast started, and I am so much more a fan after being able to speak to you. You are a true delight and a true pleasure to have on. I cannot say enough accolades for you. Thank you so much for being on with us today.
Well, it's my pleasure. When I heard what the name of this podcast was, I thought, if I get there and it's going to be all about bodice ripping and sweaty scenes on pirate ships and things like that, I will be sorely dismayed. Probably
That's a
have,
constant education that
yeah.
we find we have to give.
I bet you do. But one of my muses. I've had a number of muses. One of them was actually a very good friend, and that's the American picture book genius Maurice Sendak of Where the Wild Things Are and In the Night Kitchen, and all. And he was a true romantic, and all of his books, without exception, are about the child, who is really a metaphor for the soul. The child being brave enough to seek authenticity of feeling, authenticity of action. And that to me is a romantic notion. It comes out of the late 18th century, and it still exists in crippled and hobbled and disguised form in 2024. And on that belief, I said, now this is something I'll risk doing. So thank you for making it attractive to do, and thank you for inviting me, and for proving that I think I was right in my assessment about what it was about.
Yes.
Yes.
Bodice ripping. I mean, we could go there, but we usually don't.
Yeah. I'm afraid I have to go get some more wine, so I'll see you later.
I'm going to echo Archer says in our chat, please come back and visit us again. We would love to have you back on if you'll have us again.
Sure.
Yeah.
That would be fun. I'd look forward to it.
Fun.
Perfect.
Okay. Well, thank you all. Have a good night.
Thank
Bon
you.
appetit if you're yet to go get some dinner. Choose a saucy little bread to go with whatever you're having. Bye now.
Thank you, everybody.
As we close this episode out, this episode, along with every other episode, will be dedicated to Joe Capone, our moderator, fellow comedian, passionate encourager, and greatly missed friend. You can find us pretty much wherever you tune into podcasts. And for updates, announcements, and more, follow us on social media under Modern Romantic. Thanks, everybody. And as you're walking out today to grab your mail, ask yourself, who are you? Who are you today? Who are you tomorrow? And who will you be?